My name is Brian Nielsen, and I'm your host here for Blockchain 360, where we talk about everything blockchain. And my guest today is Tori Adams, and she is with Consensys. Tori, welcome to the Blockchain 360 podcast.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
So, Tori, tell me a little bit about yourself, and then what I'd like to do is bring that forward to what you're doing at what Consensys is doing, and then what you specifically are doing at Consensys. So, how did you get introduced to blockchain?
How did I get introduced? Well, like everybody else, I heard a few podcasts, read a few books, started to read some articles, and then thought, man, this is such a crazy technology. I got to find out more about it. And as an economist by training, I was immediately turned on by the idea of frictionless commerce.
Right,
And then
exactly.
as we went on with the idea of, oh my God, financial inclusion, oh my God, you can create your own microeconomies with this stuff. And that just brought me more and more into it. And then I started to see what we could do with government. So I began to talk to people in the government and said, hey, have you heard about this thing called blockchain? And got a lot of things back on, isn't that Bitcoin? No, it's more than that, and started to go through it.
They're not the same?
No, I have a T-shirt that says blockchain. It's not just for sex trafficking, drugs, and guns anymore. It
That's
still
a
is.
great one. I know, of course it is. So, your professional career before was what was that? You said you're an economist, so
Yeah.
fill that in.
I was in the big consulting firms. So for
Okay.
about the last 20 years, that's what I've been doing. I'm British by birth. I came to the
Where
U.S.
from?
Oh, I'm South Wales and Coalfields, which is
Okay.
West Virginia
Yes.
with communists.
Oh, well, there you go.
And what I did was I came here. I had gone to graduate school. I got my degrees, got all this fancy stuff, and started to work for PwC, for
Sure.
IBM,
Right.
for all of the normal things. And I ended up working with Booz Allen in D.C.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and from there started to do a lot of government stuff. And, it was getting old, and then blockchain came along and changed my life.
It changed your life. That's great. So, you're now with Consensys.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about, for those who don't know, and any of the listeners who don't know, what does Consensys do?
Sure.
Because it's a very complicated
It is indeed.
enterprise.
So Consensys was started by some of the folks that were on the original team that developed Ethereum. In particular, Joe Lubin.
Okay.
And Joe made a ton of money out of Ethereum.
No.
And he, rather than what I would have done, decided to start a company with that money. I would have taken the money and be having the crack crab and the lobster on the beach in the Dominican Republic.
Of course.
He said, I want to start a company. And he wanted to develop a company that would expand the Ethereum infrastructure.
Okay.
And that was Consensys. And since then, it's morphed into really doing 6 things, I think.
Okay, so what are the 6 things?
First, we expand the Ethereum infrastructure.
Okay.
If you have used Ethereum, you've probably used a Consensys product. Infura,
Sure.
MetaMask,
Sure.
these
Yeah.
are ours. As part of that, we also work with the Ethereum Alliance, and we also work with communities globally to expand understanding and use of Ethereum.
Okay.
Secondly, we develop products. We have about 40 products in different stages of development, going from Uport, an identity app,
Sure.
and Viant, a supply chain, to things like, well, we have an app that tries to put your brainwaves on the blockchain. So,
That's interesting. So we have immortality on the
That's
blockchain. Right.
So we've got some speculative things. We've got a lot of things that are sort of in that middle range, and then we've got some stuff that are sort of consumer ready. The next thing we do,
So that's number 2.
that's number 2.
Right.
Number 3 is solutions, bespoke solutions. And this is when Dubai might come to us, as they did, and said,
Sure.
can you help us implement blockchain on the government in Dubai, for Smart
Sure.
Dubai? When a
Which
pharmaceutical...
is a city.
Which is a city.
Right. It is.
It's a city.
Part of the UAE.
That's right. But it's also when a pharmaceutical company comes to us and says, can we work with you to get our supply chain onto the blockchain?
Which is a natural thing for
A
them to
natural
want
thing
to do.
to do. And frequently, products come from those engagements with solutions.
Right. You have to build a product to actually
That's to
make
do
the
that.
solution. Right.
And you get an idea from that, or you see something you can improve. Now, the third thing we do...
That was the third thing.
Oh, then the fourth,
fourth
thing we do. The fourth, or D, that we do is we do education.
Right.
And we do everything under Consensys Academy, from code school up to C-suite training.
Okay.
We do a lot of that. The next thing we do is Blockchain for social impact. We are very
Now,
serious about
what
that.
does that mean? I mean, people are going to be saying, it's like, that's a nebulous description.
Sure.
So help me understand that.
Well, if you've got a project, or if we find a project that has some social impact, and often we can't figure out how to make money out of this, but in the long run, we think there's
It's
some
impactful,
benefit.
right.
It's impactful.
Right.
Because remember, if it's impactful and it's used, Ethereum is going to be used more.
Right.
And also, we feel that Ethereum is a revolutionary technology that's going to change the world, and we want to help that change occur. So, for instance, I went to a hackathon, and there was a young woman sitting underneath a sign that said "hack harassment," and I
Hack
said,
harassment.
and I said,
Okay.
I want to talk to her.
Yeah, I want to talk to her.
What came out of that was a product called Me3, and what we do with that
Instead of me too, me three.
Me3
Clever.
was to say if you ever come up with a case where you are being harassed, you can
Put it on
log
the
it
blockchain.
onto the blockchain.
Right. Permanent
Now,
record.
Permanent record. Now that gets the thing where 20 years from now, when that person becomes a senator, and they say, "Well, why didn't you mention it?" You say, "Hey, well, I did at the time.
That's right.
I got
There's
a record."
permanent record of it.
We've also worked with the UN with human trafficking. We've worked
Brilliant.
with, and that was with IDs. We've worked on some environmental programs with
Sure.
World Wildlife Fund in Australia. So it's just generally this thing to try and find these social problems. And we have a lot of people, in fact, probably the largest single group of employees who are devoted to that side of things.
Wow. That is really way cool.
It is, it is. And then on the final thing we do is investment, which is really falls down to two areas. One is if you come to us with an idea for a token,
Right.
we will take you through everything from white paper to token launch.
Okay.
That's doing the game theory. That's thinking about the economics that are involved. That's doing the more detailed white papers and designs. Then working your way through, ultimately through the regulatory process to token launch. Now, in that process,
So a turnkey shop.
turnkey shop, we might come up and say, well, actually, this is a good thing for us to venture together on.
Right.
Or, hey, we'd like to bring you into the mesh, which is what we call the organization.
Right, right.
Or maybe you just want to pay us to do this. Now, we turn down a lot of people who come in with with ideas into that.
Right.
There's a lot of shady people in the token business.
No.
I know, it's shocking.
I'm aghast.
Yes, so that's far from everybody goes. Also, as part of that, we run a venture capital fund where we will invest in people's tokens coming in.
Sure.
And we will invest in the companies, we'll invest in their ideas. It's about $50 million. We're always
That's
looking for good
serious?
ideas.
Yeah, absolutely.
know?
And how many investments do they make a year?
I think they're probably up to about 20 a year so far.
20 a year. That's still, that's,
Yeah, they just
Awesome.
started last year.
oh,
So
so it's brand new.
yeah, brand new there. So that's sort of collectively what we do. We're a very egalitarian company. We're famous for not having a hierarchy. We have a mesh. We have people that provide
So
services.
that people understand what a mesh is, because that's both a technical term and
Sure.
all. How is it that is, for the listener, how
Right.
are they going to understand what a mesh is?
So in our case, how we're interpreting this from an organizational point of view is everybody within the firm. There are no titles. There are no hierarchies. Everybody performs a service, has a function, and has an equal say in any decision that's taken.
So how does strategic planning then happen in a mesh?
Typically what starts to happen is somebody will come up with the notion, mainly from Joe or from other folks that have been in a while, and say, we need to form a circle. And this
Form a
circle,
circle,
is
okay.
a group of people who will come together who have an interest in
A
it.
working group.
A working group. And they will work out that, and then they will start to work within, whether it be education, whether it be solutions, and begin to start to go through various democratic processes to bring people in, to get it validated.
Sure.
And it will slowly evolve into that. Now,
So then there's like a consensus building environment.
exactly. It's a collective when it comes to
Sure.
that. And sometimes...
Well, how does I mean, I'm going to take it a little devil advocate thing. How does a project get killed?
how does the project get
So
killed?
if I'm out there and
Yeah.
I got this consensus and I built it in and we've got resources credited towards it, and somebody has to come in and say, it's not really going to work.
We have a process. We have a circle.
Another circle.
And the circle here.
Now, is it the same circle, or is it always a dynamic?
It's always a dynamic.
Okay.
That circle that's going to go through those products and projects, and eventually they're going to say, it's not working.
Right.
Your puppy chain to put dogs on a blockchain.
What? That's a brilliant
great
idea.
But it's turned out to be less than perfect. So I'm very sorry we're going to have to get rid of it. Normally what happens, we found, is projects migrate into other projects.
Sure. You take those resources, those assets,
Right.
human and capital assets, and you just redirect them.
Or you find that they had an idea, but it wasn't the idea they thought.
It's the genesis of something
Something
and now
else.
let's reapply it.
So you might start with an idea related to medical records, and you say, actually, this is a broader thing about how you manage data on the blockchain and how you can do that. And then it'll migrate into a larger or a smaller project.
Right. So that brings us to really what you're doing. Now, you are in charge of the federal effort for Consensys.
As much as anybody is in charge of
Well,
Consensys.
everyone is in charge of it, but you're the one who's taking the
I have
lead.
P&L. At the end of the day, someone will yell at me. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to come to DC, to government, both federal and then more broadly state and
Sure.
local, and say, how can we empower government practitioners with this technology?
Right.
And what we're trying to do there is both do direct contract work for folks and bespoke solutions, but we're more interested in saying, how can we empower these folks? Through ideation workshops, through training, through just evangelizing what is the product and how it can help.
Exactly. And so we're at a conference here, and this conference is it's at the Washington Plaza Hotel.
Sure.
And it's kind of a quasi environment because there's some government blockchain components here, and there's a healthcare track that's here.
Yeah.
What is your opinion of the reception of government and its willingness to adopt blockchain as a solution?
I think we're starting to see government wake up.
A wake up. So they're at that phase.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what we're seeing is, I would characterize it up to now as this as being a movement of enthusiasts within government. There's always an enthusiast in every government office who has an idea. They've read the books, they're just like me, they've read the books, they get excited, they want to be involved.
And they're happy about puppy chain.
They're happy about puppy chain. And they typically start out with the idea of, hey, I got a process, and I want to put that on the blockchain.
Right.
Right? And then they might come to us, they might come to this, they might come to other things, and they start talking about it. Now, frequently, that initial process, it isn't really a good use case. It turns out to be something you could accomplish with other technologies.
Right.
But by engaging with the folks in the community, they start to think deeper about it
Right.
and start to look at those more interesting use cases.
Correct.
We're working a lot now with folks that are addressing the opioid epidemic.
And an important one.
An important one.
Absolutely.
And you start out by folks saying, how can we do the supply chain related to pills?
Right.
How can we ensure that opioids
All the
gets used?
pharma
things?
stuff. Absolutely.
Great use case. Let's look at it. But let's start to think about some of the more interesting ones. So we've talked to people in the shipping industry who say, the big problem isn't pills anymore, it's fentanyl from China.
Right.
So how can we deal with that? And we start to get into things like, well, the problem isn't being able to use blockchain to find the bad guys, it's to take the good guys out of the supply chain into a special chain so you can focus your resources on the bad guys. So we've developed models of incentivized supply chains.
Oh, interesting.
Where you join the supply chain, you pay a fee, and it's like your safe pass or something
Right.
at the airport. You're in the fast lane. But
It's global entry.
Yeah, it's global entry, but your supply chain has to be transparent.
Right,
Has to be audible.
Yep.
And we're starting to suggest using a token as an incentive system, whereby if you're in this system, every shipment you make, you place a deposit in an Ether-denominated token. And then if the next party in the chain finds you validated the rules of the chain in terms of contraband, you lose it.
Right.
So use the chain to start enforcing the chain.
Right, exactly.
Make sure the good guys
well,
are
there's
in
a risk
there.
now.
There's a risk. And push the bad guys into the chain where you can put more enforcement on.
Right, so that you can then focus the enforcement issues on a smaller group of people.
That's right.
And you've also now filtered out all the good players,
That's
or as
right.
many as you can.
And so we found that government folks are now
Do you
starting
think, though,
to move
this is
from
going to
that.
be raise the expenses, though, of that
Sure.
supply chain
Yeah.
substantially?
I think it's going to raise it. It's going to be noticeable. But you know what? Inspection comes with a price.
That's true.
You know? I mean, you can have a really cheap supply chain where you let anything through,
That's true.
and you can live with the consequences of that. And this is one thing we are very strong with suggesting with government clients in particular, is you
Right.
got to have the ROI.
Right. Well,
You know.
of course, absolutely.
And so many of the first generation of blockchain solutions tended to be, let's try it, we're not quite sure how the ROI will be, we're getting our feet wet. And I get that. But now, as we're going into more serious deployments, you've really got to think about what the ROI is.
Exactly.
And what's the risks that are involved, too.
Right. So now you just gave a speech here at this conference, and what was the topic of your speech?
The topic was a lot about what I've been talking about just now, which is how do you start by building blockchain? And you know, what are the things you have to go through? And the key point that I wanted to get over with is think big and take risks.
That is the best advice ever.
Yeah. In other words, don't say, I've got an existing process, I just want to put it on the blockchain. Okay, that's great, but it's not going to get you the ROI you think you're going to get.
Right.
It's just going to show you can do it. It's more interesting
And we've
when you
seen
push
a
ahead.
million POCs already.
That's right. Push ahead. Think of the unique social engineering aspects of this technology.
Right.
That you can put incentive systems in, that you can influence people. That's when you get the big bang for the buck. And so we were talking in that talk about what's the process to do that? When
Right.
you're going through from, don't think, I got a blockchain problem. Think, I got a problem. Is blockchain
Change
the solution?
Exactly.
And then how do I think about my problem? Does it have the characteristics of a blockchain problem? It's transparency,
Right,
accountability. Do I think
Does
there's
it
a risk
need
of
even those
tampering?
features?
Exactly.
Right.
And then to be able to move on from there and start to really begin to ideate on what might be a solution. Getting
Right.
people in a room together, people who are actually involved with the problem.
So do you view your role as the instigator of that discussion?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Very much so.
And when an institution or a government wants to actually have this, they're coming to you actually to not only pick your brain, but also to find out what other things are out there.
Exactly.
So to raise awareness.
Exactly. And, you know, frequently we do this for free. We'll start that process off because we want to encourage you to use Ethereum.
Sure.
We'll sit down and work with the government
Now,
department.
is there a particular reason outside of it being the cultural basis of the start of it that you're beholden just to Ethereum? I mean, are there other blockchains that you give consideration to, or is it that, you know what, this is a major player, we're more than happy to be the experts in this space?
That's our space. That's
Okay.
our space.
Okay.
We also think that as this space evolves, that Ethereum is going to be the solution.
Well, and there's already derivatives of Ethereum out there.
Exactly.
So does your solutions include those derivatives?
Yes, they do.
Okay, so
And we think that as you go forward, the issue of things like public and private chains will become less important. We think that the major solutions are going to be around the idea of confidential or public. And by
confidential or public, that's an interesting designation.
We think confidential means a transaction that only occurs on your machine and my machine, but is
So the
validated
consensus is between us and then just recorded.
or validated by a larger one, that a
Okay.
transaction has occurred. But it only happens between us. Now, why is that important? Because when I'm in a supply chain and I want to make a deal between you, and I don't want my other parties in the supply chain to know,
Right, of course.
I want to have that confidentiality. And I also want to have some agreement that's broader about things that are happening and the validation and all of that. Now, if I've got a private chain where I've got a limited number of people, it doesn't take too long to figure out who's doing what.
Right, well, because we know what's coming in.
Yeah.
Now we can actually then distribute what is the
That's right.
percentage. And so, yes, it leaves corporate privacies or things they want to
Yeah.
keep private at risk.
Yeah.
So you're saying that using the larger blockchain as the solution and then creating these private
Yeah.
transactions,
Yeah.
is the way to manage that supply
We
chain.
think in the
because
long
then
run that's going to involve. When we think we go to the next layer of
Right,
blockchain
right.
technology, plasma and all this, we think that's what it's evolving to.
Okay.
And we think the largest single network, which is Ethereum, is the way to do that. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be Bitcoin solutions. It doesn't mean IBM
There's
won't
not
be
going to be
pushing
any
things on.
Bitcoin solutions. It's too expensive
It's
to do.
too expensive.
It's just not going to happen.
And it might be that there are areas that a completely private network is applicable, but we think in the long run it's going to move to this confidential and then public. I think the parallel is the internet. When the internet started, people were all, are we going to have
Sure.
walled gardens,
Yep.
or is everything going to be open? And what we found in the end was, some walled gardens, most things are going to be open. There are some things that are really secure.
Right, right.
It's going to be a range of security.
Right.
And most people are going to find in the end that they transact on the broader network
No, they use that as the ledger.
as the ledger, as the validator,
Right,
as the
right.
mode of communication
Sure.
within that. But they're actually going to be keeping those confidential things secret on their own systems.
Right, exactly.
Now, how that will work, a lot of work needs to be done on that. We're moving towards
Sure.
that. But you can see that IBM Fabric is moving in that way.
Yep.
Ethereum is moving in that way. A lot of people have got the same idea and they're moving together. And I think that's when we will see widespread adoption in government.
Okay.
Because the idea of shared things is scary for government.
It's true.
Now, it's hierarchical. It's a closed space. There's a lot of secrets. But when you have that
Wait. There's secrets in
I know,
government?
isn't it amazing? It's since I've been living
You
here,
keep
I've learned
surprising
so
me
many
over and
things.
over.
So we think in the long run, that's where we're going.
Right. Well, I want to thank you for appearing on this episode of
It was
Blockchain 360.
so much fun.
And, I know that you have to run off, but thank you once again.
Thank you very much.